right, everybody, it's another episode of the Reserve Man Podcast. I'm Shay Brown. I got with me GP.
Submission does not equal control.
Shagari.
What's good?
What's up, Stan?
What's up, y'all?
And we have with us Reverend Mariko Billups today. Say hello to the people.
Hello.
We're going to talk a little bit today about God's purpose in our lives. We're going to talk about happiness versus joy, about being overly reliant on God. And you know we got to talk about the roles of the relationship.
Get there and cook, go.
We're going to do that and so much more right after this.
You know your credit score bad. I'm not a that's solid quality time. Right. Why is Steve Harvey still writing books when it's Wait a minute. Like, if I want you, I ain't saying you to Waffle House at 4 a.m. Cause you bullshit. Hey, look, I care about you. We going to Waffle House.
All right, everybody, it's another episode. We got a good one for you today. I would like to welcome my brother, Reverend Mariko Billups. What's going on, Doc?
Not too much.
Man, why don't you tell the people a little bit about yourself? Where you live, your church?
I live in Jacksonville, Florida, a native of Louisiana, born and raised. Been in Florida for 15 years and just recently planted a church of my own. Was pastoring another church for several years, but God led me in a different direction to do something different. So that's just kind of where we are right now.
Hold on. I see you say a native of Louisiana.
Yep.
So God led you to that Patriots gear you got on right there? What's up with that, Pastor? Well, let's talk about this Patriots gear.
God is
What has Tom Brady done for you?
God
wants you to be a winner. What's he talking about? God wants you to win.
God is a patriot.
I'm gonna get up off it. I'm still hurt, so I'm still hurt over here.
It's always better to be a saint than a sinner, brother. That's all. You know,
right.
Yeah.
maybe get some black and gold in your life.
Okay. We're going to move right on into the topic that we got for you first, man. God's purpose in our lives. You know, I think a lot of people struggle with this. You know, like, how are you supposed to recognize what God's purpose is for you?
Well, what audience are you talking about recognizing?
Well, let's talk about people that are younger. We're all in our 30s.
Right.
You know, at the age where they're starting to get married and have families, progress on into their careers. You know, still, you know, some people that's our age are still trying to figure it out. Like, they may have a career, but they don't know if their career is lining up with God's purpose or intended plan for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess when I say audience, I mean, specifically speaking, are you talking about a person who is quote-unquote a Christian or not? Because whether you're a Christian or not determines what God's purpose is. If you ain't saved, God's first purpose is that you become saved and become a Christian and have a relationship with Him. If you are saved, then God begins to work on a specific purpose. So those are two different things that's working. So the first thing you got to ask is, do I already have a relationship, and am I saved? Am I a Christian? And if you're not, then the purpose for a non-Christian is going to always be different than the purpose for a Christian.
So being saved is objective one.
Right.
Okay.
Well, let's say that
Objective or subjective?
I was going to say objective based on what?
Well, what I'm saying is the first mission of business, the first objective is what I'm saying. And based on what you said.
let's assume that we're talking about an audience that is saved, that's Christian.
Okay.
Now, how is that person, or what's some indicators, or what's some advice you would give them as far as trying to figure out if they're, you know, fulfilling God's purpose for them, or?
It just kind of depends on each individual's first relationship with God and discovering God's purpose. See, the thing about God, God is such that he doesn't always operate from the same modus operandi, which means the way God may show me his purpose may not be the same way that God shows you his purpose.
Okay.
And what confuses so many people is that other persons outside of their relationship with God try to tell them whether their revelation of God for his purpose in their life is authentic or not based on what God did in their life. And just because God doesn't reveal his purpose to me, like he may reveal his purpose to you, don't make my experience any more or less authentic, and it doesn't make yours any more or less authentic. So in determining God's purpose, the first thing you got to do a lot of times is shut out outside influences of people telling you God don't do that or God always do this, because God don't never always do anything.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
But to say, because your experience with God is completely different than mine, and you got to let people find their own way.
Absolutely.
You can try to help people and try to help guide people, but ultimately it's up to them to accept God the way it moves them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I tell people all the time, since we talking about football, if we going to the Superdome for a Saints game, we all trying to get to the same location, but it's more than one way to get there. So you may take one road, I may take another road, somebody else may take another road. I can't diminish the path you take, because the end goal is just that we all end up at the Superdome for the game.
Right.
So I think that's what clouds a lot of people's perspective, is listening to other people tell them God don't do that. When in reality, God is always operating differently.
Okay. So not to be clouded by other people's experiences, but to try to figure out how he's working in your own individual
Right.
life.
But how do you go about recognizing those signs? Like, even if you block out all the other noise, and I know, like, each person's relationship with God is going to be different, but it's natural. Like, if you grew up with your parents and they always talked about like their relationship with God and how God has impacted them, it's natural for you to think that your blessings should be the same, like come in the same form or the same shape. So how do you go about like recognizing it for yourself?
Well, see, the thing about it is, even based on our upbringings, the parental traits and qualities that our parents pass on to us and all that, we are all unique. And the thing about us being unique is everybody has, I guess if you would, a bag that God gives them when you were born. Your bag includes your personality traits. It includes your biological and physical traits. It includes your talents. It also includes things that you are passionate about. So, if you are physically 5'7", and you're passionate about music, it's probably safe to say that God's purpose for you is not to be an NBA basketball player. Right. So you got to look at your gifts, you got to look at your passions, and again, that's another thing that clouds people's judgment, and why I say you have to tune people out, because a lot of times we tend to try to impose and press upon our kids the route that we took. So if mom is a teacher, she wants daughter to be a teacher. If dad is a principal, he wants son to be a principal. But maybe God didn't pack that same skill set and those passions in that kid's bag. So again, that's why I reiterate, is trying to discover for your own self, what are my passions? What is my passion? What are my talents? What are my gifts? What is it that I like to do? Mm-hmm. And then based on that, to me it's real simple. The purpose of God is when you're trying to go down one road, if you're trying to go down a road and the door closes and it keeps getting blocked, and you try something else and it keep closing and it keep getting blocked, that's probably God telling you that ain't the road you need to go down.
Okay, now I'm just going to start asking questions. So, in the black community, sometimes we aren't granted the opportunities to be exposed to certain things that we might not even know we have a passion for.
Right. So
in those scenarios, like, what is a person supposed to do? Because you really might not even know your passion. You might not even know what you've been gifted with, because you haven't been exposed to much.
Right.
So, like, how should a person in that scenario approach things?
Well, I mean, it's just like trial and error, and you try this, you try that, you try this, you try that, and some people call it, like an aha moment. Some other people refer to people in that instance as late bloomers. They
Right.
got a late start, but
Right.
it's just not necessarily they got a late start. It's just the fact that they weren't exposed to realize this is what I'm gifted at, this is what I'm passionate about, this is God's purpose for me. But if you're not exposed to that, you wouldn't know it.
Right. Yeah, because I think sometimes, it's expected that we're supposed to bloom at a certain age. We're supposed to, kind of figure out what we want to do and be on the way to obtaining that at a certain age. So you're right. I mean, I think people bloom and grow at their own pace.
But that's unrealistic.
What is?
That everybody is supposed to bloom and figure out what you're doing by a certain age and be on this certain road and be on the right path or whatnot. Because I mean, all throughout history, be it biblical history or just secular history, you find examples of people who didn't discover what their purpose was and get on the right road till later on.
That's true.
But I do find that a lot of times, as blacks, we all supposed to be religious, but there's a lot of blacks that's religious that's ashamed to admit that they're not religious, or vice versa. A lot of people are ashamed to admit that they have a belief in God, or they're shunned for that because of the go-get-it mentalities. But then some people will turn around and say that God not going to do nothing for you that you're going to go get. So there's a lot of contradiction in the black community when it comes to the belief in God and what God is supposed to do for you if you don't do for yourself, or that if you're supposed to have it, you're going to have it, whether you go get it or not. So how do you feel about, there's a lot of contradictions when it comes to God and the black community.
Can people in our community tend to be overly reliant on God
Well,
to do for them?
let me, I guess, address this as best way I can, and hopefully it doesn't come across as too offensive, but I can back it up historically with all kind of facts. But a good majority of our theological ideologies and doctrinal beliefs from an African American perspective were based out of ignorance, and they weren't based out of fact and real knowledge of what God expects from, a read and understood perspective. Like I said, I don't want to go too deep in it, but if you go all the way back to, the organization of what they call the invisible institution, the black church, during slavery, blacks were basically taught a perspective of God and theology from a white perspective, a European Caucasian perspective, and there were certain passages in scriptures that were used to further suppress them and cause them to buy into slavery. But what they did was they met separately and apart from the slave owner in what they called the invisible institution, because they couldn't let the slave master know that they were having a service apart from him. But because most of them in that time, they couldn't read. They didn't have Bibles, and even if they had them, they couldn't read them. If they could, the ones who could read didn't have very much understanding. So much of the doctrine, the theology, and the ideology from the African American perspective, it was based out of really spiritual ignorance. It was based out of what you felt rather than what you cognitively could understand and make sense of in your mind. And so going back to what you were saying about, we are told you got to go get this, you got to do this. So it goes back to what you said about the contradictions. There are a lot of contradictions, and there are a whole lot of misnomers within our community as it pertains to God.
So I don't know if this is going too far astray, but a lot of people will be like, they don't believe in the white man's God because that's not the God we studied in Africa. That's not who our people believed in. So do you have any experience with studying Islamic or the Muslim faith in regards to black people and cross-referencing what we should be taking in and what we shouldn't be?
Well, I do, but but it depends on which Muslim or Islamic faith you're talking about, because the Muslim or the American or westernized Islamic faith, is a total deviation from the original Islamic faith, which is what Malcolm X discovered and why they assassinated him, because they discovered that what they were teaching him, American Islam, wasn't really original Islam, and it didn't have so much to do with the hatred of the Caucasian or European male as they were trying to indoctrinate us to believe. So when you talk about the Islamic faith, which are you talking about, the original faith, or are you talking about the westernized American? Because those are two totally different things.
The original faith.
Well, the original faith has nothing to do with the white man's God, the black man's God, and any of that. It's just about, it's very similar to Christianity with the exception that they just really don't acknowledge Christ, but most of the principles are the same.
Well, I think one issue that I tend to have is, you know, when they describe Jesus in the Bible,
Right.
they describe him.
He was clearly black.
I'm not even say he's black, but he wasn't.
He was European.
He wasn't European.
Right.
And
Based
you
on
know,
that description.
based on that description, based on the fact in the Bible, and you know, it seems like sometimes Europeans go out of their way to try to portray God and Jesus as a white man.
Yep. Yep.
And to me, that has a bigger impact than people would like to actually acknowledge. You know, broadcasting, like even in slavery time, like making Jesus to seem to be white,
Right.
and making God seem to be white, it means it's like, okay, well, he's good with this, you know, because he's a white, you know, but what do you think about that and the fact that it seems to be a strong push to try to make it seem as if Jesus had blue eyes and, you know, he was like truly European? Like, you don't have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, if you read the Bible, like you said,
Right.
the description of Jesus, and not only that, just the historical facts, it's hard to conclude that he was, you know, white or European American and not African American. But this is just my opinion. This is just my perspective. I think the racial narrative and the color perspective is really nothing more than a deception to keep you from focusing on what is the issue at hand, which is, you know, whether he's black or white, you know, whether he's of this ethnicity or that ethnicity, the principles, the Christian principles still stand the same.
Right.
So when you start getting into race and color in this thing, I think that's nothing more than a distraction from really the essence of the principles themselves, because they don't say love your neighbor if they white or love them if they black.
Right.
They just say, you know, that you're supposed to love them, you're supposed to treat them right. But going back to that, there was an emphasis, and I don't know why, but there was an emphasis to portray him as that when clearly he's not, because the Bible describes him as brown. His feet were like brass. Brass is dark.
Right.
And it talks about his eyes having
right.
flames of the day. That's not blue. That's
Right.
not gray. That's not green.
Hands like
And
lambs would.
when Jesus was born, it says that Joseph and Mary took him to Egypt to hide him. If he was a white baby with blue eyes, how you gonna hide him in Egypt around all black babies?
Right.
Well, when you think about organized religion as a whole, you know, especially throughout history, you know, two things come to mind. Number one, you want your God to look like you. So I feel like if you know, Europeans probably made Jesus look like he was blonde hair, blue eyes, because they were blonde hair, blue eyes. Number two, religion in history has been used as a method to control people for years and years and years and years. So is it easier for me to convince a group of people that they're inferior by me telling you that you're inferior, or me making God seem to be the total opposite of you? So I think it was also a method of control.
You also was told God was made in your image, so whatever your image was, you believed he was like you.
Well, that's what I believe. But what I'm saying is, over time, I believe that kind of got overlooked, because a lot of scriptures get overlooked, especially like we just talked about the one where they describe what Jesus looked like, but yet you'll go in the church and they got a blonde hair, blue eyed Jesus on the cross.
Well, I want to just jump in here right quick. I think, but I agree with you that type of stuff distracts you from what's really important and what the true principles are and what, you know, whatever the Bible says, like it distracts you away from that. But it seems like once you start taking an interest in history,
Right.
and what the Catholic Church has done throughout history, even some of the Protestant churches have done throughout history, you know, it makes you question things. It makes you become kind of like side-eye, you know, organized religion or Christianity in general. And like, how do you combat that? Like, once you learn the history and you learn things that, because it's hard to like disassociate the church from what the actual Bible truly is trying to portray. So how do you like separate the two? Because a lot of people become conflicted as they get older and they start getting into history and they start learning things. They're like, oh, well,
Religion really, most people don't even really don't understand what religion can or cannot have anything to do with God. Religion is just a systematic set of beliefs. So you can be religious and never believe in God. We saw just last Sunday a whole bunch of people in New Orleans were religious. They may not have necessarily been religious about God, but they was religious about the black and gold.
Right.
There are people who get up every weekend, Saturday, Sunday, go fishing, go to the park, they religiously wash their car. Religion is just a systematic set of beliefs that you govern and structure your life for. It may or may not include God. But when you talk about organized religion from a God perspective, I mean, he's right. It has been used as a system of control. And so our desire should never be to become as religious as we could. Our desire ought to be to become as spiritual as we can and connect, you know, with God's spirit. The whole thing about religion causes people to be something that they not. It brings out potentially the worst in people. And to quote Gandhi on this, and this is where a lot of people have trouble with God and their whole concept of organized religion. Gandhi, as he studied Jesus and he studied Jesus's principles, and then he looked at quote unquote Christians, the church, and all these other people associated with the church, he said, this Jesus character I like. It's these so-called Christians I don't understand. Why? Because they call themselves after him, but they are not demonstrating any of his principles and his characteristics. I like what he stood for. I like what he taught, but it's his followers that I just can't seem to make sense of.
But like, how do people truly find the true meaning in Christianity when they're relying on like pastors to guide them, but these pastors aren't necessarily exhibiting, or some of these pastors aren't necessarily exhibiting the qualities of the quote unquote Christian?
Right.
You know, because to me it's hard for somebody to just find it on their own. They need some type of guidance and so leadership to get there. But in this day and age, it seems like there's a lack of leadership in certain areas at certain churches, and like they're misguiding people. So like, how do people really truly find their way if they don't really have the leadership in certain places to get there?
Well, within each and every one of us, you know, whether people acknowledge or not, God has created a void that can only be filled and satisfied by having a connection with spiritual and personal connection with him. And so, you know, people try all kind of things to fill that void, but, you know, to no avail. You know, money, sex, drugs, all this other stuff, only to discover I'm right back in the same place.
Right.
I say that to say that it is hard to find it on your own, but you can if you truly seeking, you know, God to fill that void. As it pertains to the leadership, the whole thing about leadership, and I agree with you, man. There is there is really a lack of spiritual and religious leadership in our churches. But this is why I try to get people, you know, to understand, you know, your job is not to try to be like your pastor, your teacher, your deacon, your Sunday school teacher. That person's job or responsibility, I ain't gonna call it a job, but that person's responsibility is not to get you to depend on them or to admire them. Their responsibility is to try to teach you how to depend on God.
Right.
Not to look up to them, but how to look up to God.
Right, I agree with that.
All right, so with that said, do you think that we as faith goers, people that have faith and want to follow these spiritual leaders and follow the pastors, do we, in a sense, not give them enough leeway when it comes to human qualities? Because, like, I know everyone looked up to John Gray. women ready to throw the whole John Gray away when they found out that he bought his wife the Lamborghini, and it was so say because they found out he had cheated on her. So how do we get people to see that they deserve to be forgiven too? Because at the same time, they are our spiritual leaders, but they're still human in a sense, and that even pastors not going to be totally perfect, but how do we hold these people accountable while still giving them leeway?
Go ahead, brother. I want to hear what you have to say, but I have a strong opinion on this too.
Well, I mean, it's just, and I guess it just depends on how you look at it or what your perspective of it is, because some people.
My perspective, I ain't mean to cut you off, but my perspective, I'm gonna give you my perspective is that he's human. He's still flesh.
Right.
He's led by God, but he's still flesh. He's not perfect.
Right. Well, when I say your perspective, I mean I guess just the individual's perspective, because a lot of that is born and birthed out of some previous things, some previous history, and person's vulnerabilities that they want to cover and disguise. And so people who have been hurt, people who have been manipulated, people who have been deceived, they already have a defensive mechanism up. So the first sign or indication that resembles something that they've previously experienced, they not willing to forgive, they not willing to look the other way, they not willing to say, that's a man just like anybody. It's just like, as y'all were talking earlier, somebody who is a victim of some kind of assault or domestic abuse, the first sign they see of another situation that resembles what they've done, guess what they do? Automatically get defensive because of what has previously happened. And a lot of times you find, like you say, you personally, you can look at it and say, he's a man, he's not perfect, he is to be forgiven. But there are people who can't do that, and a lot of time it's about their own hurts, their own pains, and their own vulnerabilities. And so that is their defensive mechanism to guard, to make sure, I don't hold this person too, because guess what? If I don't hold you too high and I don't hold you in too high regard, you can never ever disappoint me and you can never ever hurt me. You can only hurt me if I open up to you and hold you in high regard.
Well, there's a deeper issue. I feel like, people, you can't see God, you can't touch God. The only thing we have of God, because God the Father there's never been a description of what he looks like. Now, obviously, we just talked about what Jesus looks like, but we've never seen Jesus in person. So I think people want to have a physical representation of what God is on earth, and I think they look to their pastor. And you look at your pastor the wrong way, you look at church the wrong way. People go to church and people want to sit in the church, they want to sit in a sermon, and they want to listen to something, and they would just want to take it to the bank. For me, listening to a sermon is like going to school. If I come sit in your church and I listen to what you got to say, all what you got to say as somebody who studied the Bible and know it more than me, all you supposed to do is provoke a thought. I'm supposed to go ahead and take that and do my own research, read my own scriptures, listen to what you have to say, and grow in my faith. But people don't do that. People want to cut corners. Right. They want to go ahead and look at you, listen to what you say, and take it to the bank. Pastor Phillips said that. And I think that's where people go wrong and people get lost when it comes to being spiritual and being in their faith, because you might take somebody else's interpretation and that person could be wrong because they're human. But you taking that to the bank and you ain't did the research for yourself. Just me, if I feel like I'm gonna be wrong doing my own research, trying to study the scripture myself, trying to find God for myself, then take somebody else's interpretation.
Right.
We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back with more right after this.
Your credit score bad. I'm not gonna call you on the job, but that's solid quality stuff. Right. Why is Steve Harvey still writing books? Wait a minute. Like, if I want you, I ain't saying you to Waffle House at 4 a.m. You bullshit. Hey, look, I care about you. We going to Waffle House.
All right, everybody, we're back and we have more. I have a question for you. I personally listened to a sermon that you gave, and your thoughts on this topic like really resonated with me, and I was wondering if you would explain to the people a little bit about the difference between joy and happiness.
One is a Maine song and one is the Al Green song. That's the difference. Next question.
You got you right.
Happiness is, I guess, a worldly perspective, or earthly perspective, or concept, or term, whereas joy is a spiritual concept, a spiritual term, and obviously happiness is just kind of what it sounds like. It's determined by what is happening around you, so that if conditions in your life are favorable and things are positive and things are going your way, you can be happy. If they are not positive and they are not favorable and they're not going your way, then you are unhappy. Joy, on the other hand, has nothing to do with your surroundings. Doesn't matter how your day went, don't matter if you lost your job, doesn't matter if your kids are acting crazy or your spouse is tripping or you don't have any money. Joy is a fruit of the spirit, which means it's produced from the inside. So even when everything is going wrong on the outside, you won't be happy, but you can still have joy, because joy is not based on your external surroundings. It's based on something internally.
That's dope.
That's deep.
Yeah.
Because honestly, I didn't really think of it like that. I kind of associated the two together.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to hear that. It's interesting to hear that perspective. Because I definitely didn't look at it exactly like that.
No, a lot of people think it's the same thing.
Right.
And I thought, yeah, that's real dope, man. I really wanted people to hear that.
I'm glad you brought that up, bro.
So we spent a lot of time in the past year talking about roles in relationships. Men, women. And since we have you here, we was wondering, like, as far as a marriage between a man and a woman, like, what are the roles in a relationship supposed to look like in accordance with what God intended?
Everybody, all ears on this one.
You ain't lying, nothing.
Well, the roles are obviously the man is supposed to be the head or the lead, and I'm gonna qualify that in just a minute. And the wife or the female is supposed to submit to her man or her husband, whoever, as the lead, or acquiesce to them, that sort of thing. Now let me qualify that, because in the Bible where it says husbands are to be the head of their wives, there are some prerequisites. That the first of it says, husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. That means that a woman is supposed to submit to a man who demonstrates that he loves her the way Christ loves the church. So if your woman don't feel like you willing to take one for her, that you love her unconditionally and wholeheartedly and will always do what's in her best interest and the family's best interest, if you don't do your part, you can't expect her to do her part. Like a lot of men saying, you supposed to submit to me. She is, but she's supposed to submit to you once you satisfy those prerequisites.
Yeah.
If you don't satisfy those prerequisites, you can't expect her to submit to you. Because a woman is not supposed to submit to a man who is going contrary to what the Bible says and what God's will is for her life, if he's not doing what he's supposed to do. But here's what I will tell you, and I discovered, and anybody that's been married for a long time in a good relationship, they'll tell you this. If a husband loves his wife the way Christ loved the church, you don't have to tell her submit. Women will gladly submit to a man that's going to work hard, that's going to love them, that's going to respect them, that's going to provide for them, that ain't going to cheat on them, that's going to be a good father to their kids. You don't have to tell that woman to submit. She'll gladly submit when you do what you're supposed to do.
You hit all the pillars too.
Everything.
Home, church,
work.
family, work. You hit all them, boy.
Yeah, when you that man, you never have to worry about a woman submitting. She'll gladly submit.
Y'all hear that, fellas? It's got some prerequisites.
It's got some prerequisites.
And if you ain't hitting them prerequisites, you need to get them extra credit courses.
Okay, we talk about the prerequisites for men.
Staying with the prereqs.
I'm mad.
Staying with the prereqs for women.
I don't want to seem one-sided on the podcast.
So let's get the prerequisites from women from a pastor.
I'm with you. But again, I just told you what it says for men, but then
Right.
to wives, it says, wives, you are to submit to your own husband. Meaning that when you're in a relationship and you are married and the husband is fulfilling his biblical duties and responsibility, the wife is supposed to submit to him. And when that word submit, it has a lot of nuances and a lot of connotations, but biblically speaking, it's because the Bible talks about a husband and wife being a helpmate.
Right.
And that word submit there that is used, it doesn't necessarily mean to bow down to, but it simply means one step behind. So in other words, in determining how we going to discipline our kids, in determining are you going to work this job or are you going to stay at home, in determining this, the husband takes the lead and the wife as a helpmate is supposed to be right there supporting him but behind his lead. That's what that term submit means.
So, all right, I'm 100% hear you on that, but a lot of conflict comes in when the helpmate can do more or just as much as the man, so she doesn't feel like she should submit.
He feeling that one.
He's bobbing the head back here.
Yeah, because I talk to people all the time, and let me just preface this by saying I don't have any issues with any woman making a lot of money, having a good position, and having a good job. And I don't think God has a position with it. But what
The more money you make, the more money we
what
make.
I do think God has a problem with is when you become a puppet to your position and your power. Meaning that, you know what, because you got this power and this position on your job, and like you said, you can do more than what your husband can do, don't allow that to be your puppeteer and you just on the strings, meaning that she, like you say, she feels like, well, I make this and I provide this and I can do this, so I don't have to submit. I'm going to make the decisions. I'm going to do this. That goes against God's divine plan and God's divine arrangement. And when you do that, I mean, you set yourself up for all sorts of things. Affairs, divorce, your kids, not being properly raised, not being mannerable. Why? Because that's outside of God's divine design.
And ladies, let me clarify. He's not saying that you shouldn't be respected because you make money, or that your man should value less, or that he should take charge of your life. It's saying that in God's plan, with God's marriage, both sides were supposed to do what marriage was intended to do, because marriage is a biblical thing, and it is based upon the Bible and both sides handling their respective duties. Right. Now, when you come to terms with and you have that conflict because of money and the power and arrangement of jobs and such, you gotta make a happy medium. You gotta meet halfway, and you both gotta respect each other.
Now, I got a question, something to do with that. You know, one of my favorite.
But hold on,
go ahead,
because I want to clarify what he said. That's exactly. I don't want women to think I'm disrespecting them or saying that they supposed to just, you know, bow down this, that, or the other, and we not respecting them. But you know, it's just what you're saying. This is God's divine design and God's divine plan, and so it'll help if people understand marriage for what it is. Marriage is covenantal, it's not contractual. It's a covenant, it's not a contract. A contract states, I'm going to do this if you do that, so that if you don't do that, I'm not going to do this. A covenant is just that. It says, I'm going to do this whether you do that or not. And if people go into it understanding it's covenantal, not contractual, then even when they don't do what they're supposed to do, you still do what you're supposed to do, because this is not a contract, this is a covenant. And that's the difference between a contract and a covenant. A contract suggests, I do mine if you do yours. A covenant says, I'm going to do mine whether you do yours or not.
Spitting that fire.
Hot fire.
Breach of contract, not a covenant.
Covenant make it work.
So my question is, one of my favorite books of all time that I've ever read is Kingdom Man by Tony Evans. You know I love that book, man. It's a great book.
Only book that boy talk about.
Hey, it's a great book, though. Everybody should read it. But anyway, one thing he describes in that book is he talks about the man should be the pastor of the house as part of his role.
Pastor and priest.
Okay, cool. So since you obviously agree with that, can you talk about what that role entails?
Well, in order for you to, well, not gonna let me back up a little bit. As we talked about earlier, being that head and setting that head, here's what a lot of males would like to do. We want to be the head in some areas, but not be the head in other areas. And what Evans is emphasizing, and it is a great point, is if you be the head in this area, in the pastor priest area, you don't have to worry about being the head in all the other areas, because if you structure your family to sit down and eat together, you structure your family to pray together, you structure your family to discuss God and biblical principles together, as y'all discuss that and talk about that, then you ain't got to fight with your wife over having sex. You ain't got to argue with your kids over curfew, this, that, and the other. Why? Because you have established as pastor and priest, what's going to govern our house. And in this house, we're not going to be governed by me as the man and because I say so I'm the man. We ain't gonna be governed by, mom, because, mom works, she makes all the money. We ain't gonna be having a majority vote rule here. We gonna be governed by these principles because we've established them by me being the pastor and priest in the house. And then here's the thing. Most of the time, women don't have a problem with men being pastor and priest in their house. And if you establish that, most women will follow it.
I
That's
agree
real.
with that.
If you establish that in your house, most women won't even buck against it. And when you do establish, it's only gonna work to your benefit.
All right, I'm liking that. That's real.
So I wanna circle back around, because I don't feel like we really hit on this earlier. You did talk about the origins of it and it being stemming from ignorance, but I just wanted to, get a few more thoughts from you on the ignorance in practice, I guess. For example, like, I go to the doctor takes an MRI.
Right.
He says, man, your knee is jacked up, you tore it, ligament,
Right.
you're going to have surgery, or you're going to need a whole total knee replacement.
Right.
And then I go home and somebody says, oh, don't listen to what that doctor said, just pray about it.
Right.
You'll be able to walk on that knee. Like, that kind of thing.
No, God sent you that doctor.
Right.
Yeah.
If everything come from God, the doctor and his knowledge came from God too. They tripping.
Well, I was asking the pastor.
Oh, my bad.
Yeah, I'm not saying nothing. I'm not saying stuff.
My bad.
Well, man, God works in conjunction with, and oftentimes in channels through people of expertise, be it your lawyer, be it your doctor, your pastor, whoever. And so it's not exclusively either or, either the doctor is right or either God is right, but it's mutually inclusive. It's both and you got to see it as that, God is working through the doctor, working through the attorney, working through the teacher, the principal, whoever. God can work in and through that so that you don't have to disqualify or discount either or, but it could be both and. And just like he's saying, the doctor, you went to see the doctor, God provided an avenue for you to go see him. God provided an avenue for you to have the insurance to go see him, and then God gave them the expertise to share it with you. So if God provided you with all that, you kind of have to be ignorant to just discount and say, well, regardless of what he say, I'm going to go home and pray. That's God saying, I done opened the door, but I'm not going to make you walk through it.
Mm-hmm. Free will. Can you just, before we get out of here, because we running low on time, can you just, give us your take just on the concept of free will?
Well, free will is just simply the fact that even though God is sovereign and God can do whatever he wants, whenever he wants, don't have to have any permission or input from you and I, God could totally force all of us to just do what he wanted us to do, all of us to be saved. But he's not going to do that. You know, God allows us as human agents to have choices in the things we do and what we say, where we go, and all of that. Now, God, through his revelation and his purpose, reveals to us what he would like for us to do, but God is never going to make us do anything. So God gives you the free will to make choices. And you can make choices. God, matter of fact, God can tell you to do something. You can choose of your own free will and volition to do something else. He'll let you do that, but this is what he won't let you do. He'll let you make the choices. He will not let you control the consequences of those free will choices. So when you make choices, which is what most people struggle with, accepting responsibility for choices that you make. When you make choices, understand God will let you make the choices. God will not let you control the consequences.
Yeah. Wow.
So choose wisely.
There it is. All right, y'all. We'll be right back, and we're going to bring you a black prominent figure. And we're going to give that to you right after this.
You know your credit score bad. I'm not gonna clown you on the Starbucks page. That's solid quality time. Right. Why does Steve Harvey still writing books when it's all Wait a minute. Like, if I want you, I ain't taking you to Waffle House at 2 a.m. You bullshit. Hey, I care about you. We going to Waffle House.
All right, everybody, we're back with this black prominent figure. GP, who you got for us, brother?
Well, brother, we talked so much about people from the past. I want to talk about some of the enlightened minds that's gonna lead our future, man. And this little brother right here, Elijah Presley, a native of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He's 11 years old and completed all of his high school coursework. Wow. He's a child prodigy, and he's gonna be starting at Southern University this spring as an incoming freshman at 11 years old.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. That's awesome. Black excellence. I love it.
Yeah,
man, this has been a deep conversation. We appreciate you coming in and talking to us, Reverend Billups. You know, how do people find you in Jacksonville?
He gonna be the only person in Jacksonville wearing
The Patriot gear.
That's it. Just look for the red, white, and blue number 12 jersey.
The Patriot pastor.
That was me and him at the game earlier this year, last year. But
You gotta have faith to do that in Jacksonville.
Yes, sir.
yeah, if you enjoyed the episode, subscribe, share it. Hit us up on IG. That's at The Reserved Man. If you have questions, we'll be sure to pass those along to the Reverend. And we are out.
You know your credit score bad. I'm not gonna clown you on the Starbucks page. That's solid quality time. Right. Why does Steve Harvey still writing